If you're finding that you're having trouble in your relationships, here are four things that you can start implementing today. The first is that you need to communicate your expectations clearly. Many times, families aren't actually communicating what their expectations actually are, and the other party isn't meeting them because they don't know they are. And then they're setting each other up for failure because nobody is really on the same page. So, expectations need to be communicated by all parties and they need to be agreed upon. Are they realistic? Are they fair? Do they make sense based on the person's development or their workload or whatever that may be? So that has to be something that is an open discussion. And it requires a lot of flexibility, collaboration, and maybe even compromise. But communicating it early is the first step to make sure everyone's on even the same page. The second is that of setting boundaries. Setting boundaries is important in relationships because that is your communicated limit for what makes you comfortable and safe. So, boundaries in a relationship, there are many types. It can be communication boundaries. How do you communicate? When do you communicate? When do you need to take time when it's too much to talk about something at a certain time? What are the do's and don'ts of communication? No name calling, no yelling, no cursing, or whatever is a hard stop for you where you need to reset and pause the conversation. You can also have boundaries related to physical touch. You have sexual boundaries, you have intellectual boundaries, you have emotional boundaries. Emotional boundaries are really big in relationships because it needs to be communicated what the person can't carry for the other person. And that's frequently where there's a lot of problems, is where there's no emotional boundaries and you get really codependent or enmeshed with each other. The third principle is to not take things personally. Now, this is a very common cognitive distortion where someone relates every situation to themselves. And many times, most times, it's not about you. Most of the time, you can come to the conclusion that it's something about them or something else in their life, not about you. So be mindful when you personalize, you're almost always projecting your insecurities onto other people. And that can be a source of major conflict because then you start making it a lot of victim and blaming conversation, and that's rarely productive. The fourth and final tip that you could start applying is to assume the best of other people. Now, this requires a lot of maturity, but it goes along with not taking things personally, where you're not channeling every negative past interaction you've had into this interaction. You're starting fresh and you're assuming the best. If that person doesn't mean well toward you, then you can address that as it comes and move on. And then when you have a next interaction, you can do the same. But you're always starting with assuming the best, as opposed to assuming the worst of other people. When you assume the worst, you can almost always expect a negative interaction or a negative relationship to result. So if you assume the best, you're starting on a more positive front and you're more able to approach conflict or negativity in a productive manner.